They were going to hang him at dawn, until his wife made the most dangerous deal of her life. The town was quiet that night, but the silence was heavy with fear. Every street seemed darker than usual, the shadows stretching long under the dim lanterns. People whispered in hushed tones in their homes, afraid to draw attention to themselves. They had heard the news. John, a man known to many in the town, was to be hanged at dawn. The very idea of it made the town uneasy, for John was not a stranger. He had worked hard, helped neighbors when he could, and never asked for much. Yet here he was, accused of a crime so serious that the law had decided there was no hope for mercy. The thought that his life would end in the cold light of morning filled the town with an unspoken tension. Mary, John's wife, sat by the fireplace in their small home. The fire flickered and cast shadows across the room, and she could hardly see the walls around her through the blur of tears. She had tried to keep calm, to keep her mind focused, but the thought of losing John in a few hours made her chest tighten as though it were being crushed. She thought back to the morning of his arrest, how officers had come to their door and taken him without a clear explanation. John had tried to explain, but the authorities would not listen. Mary had begged and pleaded, but her voice seemed to vanish into the cold night air. The officers had been stern, and even the neighbors who had known John for years had said nothing. Fear had made them silent. Mary paced the floor, her hands wringing the edges of her apron. She thought of her children, their small faces sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware of the danger looming over their father. She had to do something, she told herself. Standing in the dim light, she felt the weight of her task pressing on her shoulders. She had always known life could be hard, but she had never imagined a night like this, where her courage would be tested so severely. She had to think fast, because the hours until dawn were slipping away. Each passing minute was a reminder of how little time she had left to save the man she loved. John, in the cold, dark cell of the town jail, tried to stay calm, but his thoughts kept spinning. He thought of Mary, of their children, and of the life they had built together. He wondered if he would ever see the sunrise again, if he would ever hear Mary's voice outside the bars again. The cell was small, the walls damp and cold, and the faint sound of the town clock striking midnight echoed through the empty streets. He could hear the faint shuffle of boots on the stone floors, the occasional whisper of the guards, but mostly there was silence, a silence that seemed to grow heavier with every passing moment. The townspeople, too, were restless. Word of the hanging had spread quickly, and people were torn between curiosity and fear. Some had gathered near the outskirts of the jail, unsure if they wanted to witness the event, while others whispered to one another behind closed doors. Many had known John as a fair, honest man, and the thought of his death made them uneasy. They could not stop it, but their hearts ached at the thought. Children huddled close to their parents, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it. The adults spoke in low voices, careful not to let anyone hear them. Mary knew she could not simply wait for help to come on its own. She had to act, even if the plan seemed dangerous, even if it put her in harm's way. She thought of every person who might have influence, anyone who could change the outcome. Every knock on her door could be the beginning of hope or disaster. Her mind raced with possibilities. She could go to the sheriff, but he was known to follow orders without question. She could appeal to the town council, but they were cautious and afraid of upsetting the law. She realized that if John was to survive, she might need to make a choice she had never considered before, one that could put her own safety at risk. The night seemed to stretch endlessly. Mary sat by the window, watching the flickering lanterns outside. She listened to every sound, the distant bark of a dog, the faint footsteps along the cobblestone streets, even the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Each sound could carry news. Each shadow could hide danger. She thought of the officers who had taken John, their stern faces and cold eyes, and she wondered what they would do if she approached them now. Fear gripped her, but it was mixed with determination. She could not allow despair to paralyze her. In the quiet moments, she recalled the small joys she had shared with John, the times they had laughed together, the evenings spent talking by the fire, the hard work they had done side by side. She thought of the children's laughter and the warmth of their little home, and she drew strength from those memories. It was these thoughts that gave her courage to face what she knew would be the most dangerous night of her life. She would do whatever it took to save him. The first light of dawn was still hours away, and yet Mary felt the weight of urgency pressing down on her. She prepared herself mentally for what she might have to do, rehearsing conversations in her mind, considering every possible outcome. She thought about how she would approach the officers, how she would speak to those with influence, and how she would negotiate. There was no room for error. Every word, every gesture, every decision mattered. Her life and John's life depended on it. Meanwhile, John tried to keep himself focused on survival. He paced the small cell, occasionally leaning against the damp walls to steady himself. He could hear the faint sound of his wife's footsteps in his mind, imagining her moving tirelessly through the night, planning, hoping, fighting for him, even though he was confined, even though danger surrounded him. The thought of Mary gave him strength. He knew she would not give up, and he clung to that hope like a lifeline. As the night wore on, Mary's determination grew stronger. She could feel the tension in the air, not just around her home, but throughout the town. Every sound outside reminded her that time was running out. She made a decision. She would reach out to someone who could help, someone who might be able to intervene. It was dangerous, perhaps even reckless, but she had no choice. If she failed, John would be gone forever. If she succeeded, they might both live to see another day. With the first hint of moonlight fading from the sky, Mary gathered her courage and stepped out into the night. Her heart raced as she moved through the quiet streets, careful not to draw attention. She knew the town was watching, and she knew that any mistake could cost John his life. Yet she moved forward, driven by love and desperation. She thought of all she had learned in her life, how to be brave when faced with danger, how to speak with conviction, how to persuade even the hardest hearts. Tonight, she would need all of these skills. Every step felt like it carried the weight of the world. Mary moved carefully, listening to the faint sounds around her. She could see the shadows of buildings, the glimmer of lanterns, and the occasional silhouette of a guard passing by. Her mind raced with possibilities, thinking of whom she could approach and what she could offer in exchange for John's life. The town was full of secrets, full of people with hidden influence, and she knew that navigating this web of power would not be easy. Yet she pressed on, knowing that hesitation could mean the end. By the time Mary reached the first of the people she believed could help, her resolve had hardened. She took a deep breath, steadying her hands, and prepared to speak. She knew the words she chose could make the difference between life and death. The danger of the night was real, but so was her courage. And in that moment she decided that she would not allow fear to rule her actions. She would fight with every ounce of strength she had to save the man she loved, no matter the cost. The night had grown colder, and the quiet streets of the town seemed even more shadowed than before. Mary walked carefully, her heart pounding in her chest, each step measured, each breath controlled. The danger was real. Anyone could notice her movement, anyone could report her, and she knew that the slightest mistake could mean the end for John. But she could not allow fear to stop her. Every fiber of her being was focused on the one thing that mattered: saving the man she loved. She thought about John as she moved. His calm strength, his gentle laughter, the way he had always protected her and their children. The memory of his smile filled her mind, giving her courage even as her hands trembled. Mary knew she had to act, but she also knew she had to act wisely. This was not a simple plea to the authorities. This was a careful negotiation with lives at stake. One wrong word, one wrong gesture, and John's fate would be sealed. She could not fail. Mary had spent the past hours considering her options. She knew some people in the town held more power than they let on. There was the local businessman, who often influenced the sheriff's decisions. There was the elder who had ties to the council, and there were others, hidden in shadows, whose influence could sway a life-or-death decision. She had no choice but to approach them, to negotiate, and perhaps even to make promises she would never have imagined making before this night. Her mind raced as she imagined the conversations ahead, how she would speak, what she would say, and how she could convince them that saving John was not only right but urgent. As she reached the first house, she paused to gather her courage. The door was heavy, the wood worn and old, and she could hear faint sounds from inside. Taking a deep breath, she knocked gently, careful not to make too much noise. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a man whose expression was unreadable in the dim light. Mary's heart leapt and sank at the same time. She knew she had to speak quickly and clearly to make him understand the seriousness of the situation. "Please," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "I need your help. My husband, they plan to hang him at dawn. I don't know who else to turn to. He's innocent. You have influence. Please, I beg you, help me save him." The man studied her carefully, his eyes sharp, as if measuring her sincerity and her desperation. He said nothing at first, and Mary felt the seconds stretch like hours. She could see the doubt in his eyes, the hesitation, but then, slowly he nodded, almost imperceptibly. Mary's heart lifted slightly, but she knew this was only the first step. She had to be convincing. She had to prove that helping John was not just an act of mercy, but the right thing to do. She explained John's side of the story, detailing the events that had led to his arrest. She spoke of his character, his honesty, the way he had always contributed to the town, and how many people trusted and respected him. She spoke of their children, of the small home they had built, and the life they had tried so hard to maintain. Her words flowed, heartfelt and urgent, as she painted a picture of a man who deserved a chance at life. The man listened quietly, his expression unreadable. Mary felt her heart tighten with every passing second. Could he refuse? Would her efforts be in vain? She took a deep breath and continued, reminding him of the danger that awaited John and of the irreversible consequences if no one acted. She could feel her own fear mingling with determination, knowing that this moment might define everything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man spoke. His voice was low, deliberate. "I will see what I can do," he said. "But you must understand, there are limits. The law, the sheriff, they follow rules. There are people who will resist. You may have to make sacrifices." Mary nodded, understanding immediately. She had expected nothing less. Sacrifices would be necessary, and she was prepared to face them. Her love for John was stronger than any fear, stronger than any danger that might come her way. She thanked him and left, her mind already moving to the next step. She knew this would not be easy, that she would need to speak to others, persuade others, perhaps even risk more than she had imagined. But there was no turning back now. As she walked through the quiet streets again, she thought of John in his small, dark cell. She imagined his hands gripping the cold bars, his face pale with worry, his mind restless with the same thoughts that raced through hers. She wanted him to know that she was fighting for him, that she would not allow despair to win. Every step she took, every person she approached, was a step closer to saving him. And she would not stop until dawn, no matter the cost. Mary went from house to house, speaking to those she believed could help. Some refused, citing fear or loyalty to the law. Others listened carefully, nodding, weighing the risks and benefits. Some offered advice, some offered promises of support, and some simply remained silent. Mary learned quickly how fragile hope could be, how easily it could be dashed by doubt or hesitation. But she pressed on, fueled by determination and the love she felt for John. Hours passed like minutes, and the sky began to hint at the first signs of morning. Mary felt the pressure mounting. Dawn was approaching, and with it, the execution of her husband. She had to act quickly, had to make every negotiation count. She thought of strategies, of offers she could make, of arguments she could present that would compel even the most cautious or stubborn individuals to help. And her mind worked furiously, calculating, planning, adapting to each obstacle that appeared. In the early hours, Mary finally encountered someone who seemed willing to take a bold step on her behalf. This person had influence over the sheriff's decision and could delay the execution if convinced. Mary explained the situation again, detailing the urgency, the injustice, and the human cost of allowing John to die. She spoke of the children who would grow up without a father, of the community that would lose a valuable member, and of the moral responsibility of intervening. Her words were passionate, her voice steady, and her presence unwavering. The person listened carefully, asking questions, probing for details, weighing the risk against the potential reward. Mary answered honestly, without hesitation, showing the depth of her knowledge, her courage, and her commitment. She understood that this was a delicate balance, that one wrong word could destroy everything she had worked for. But she also knew that this was her only chance. She had to act with clarity, intelligence, and bravery. By the time the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, Mary had managed to secure tentative support. It was not a complete victory, but it was hope, the first sign that John's life might be spared. She returned home, her heart both heavy and light, knowing that the next hours would be critical. She had done what she could, but she also knew that the final outcome depended on the decisions of others and the courage she had already shown. She paused by the window, looking out at the town bathed in the soft gray light of early morning. The streets were waking slowly, the first sounds of a new day beginning to fill the air. Mary thought of John, of the small cell where he waited, unaware of the progress she had made, unaware of the hope that now existed. She whispered a silent prayer, asking for strength, for guidance, and for the courage to face whatever came next. Every minute that passed was precious. Mary knew that by the time the sun fully rose, everything could change. She prepared herself for the next steps, for the confrontations and negotiations that might be required, for the final decisions that would determine John's fate. The night had tested her, had pushed her to the limits of fear and courage, but she had not faltered. And as dawn approached, she felt a quiet resolve settle over her, a determination that she would not let this day take John from her, no matter how dangerous the path ahead. Mary sat down briefly, gathering her strength for the hours to come. She thought of the family she had built, the life she had shared with John, and the future they might still have if she could succeed. Her mind was sharp, her resolve firm, and her heart full of love. She knew the road ahead would be perilous, but she also knew that courage, strategy, and determination could overcome even the darkest of circumstances. And with that thought, she stood once more, ready to face whatever challenges awaited. determined to save the man who meant everything to her. The sun was beginning to rise over the town, painting the sky with pale shades of pink and gold, but Mary felt no warmth. The chill of fear and urgency ran deep through her, mingling with determination. Today was the day that would decide John's life. Every decision she made, every word she spoke, had the potential to save him or doom him. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders like a heavy stone, but she could not allow it to crush her. There was no room for hesitation, no space for doubt. Mary knew that words alone might not be enough. She had gained tentative support from some influential people in the town, but she also knew that influence could be fragile, easily shaken by fear, pride, or loyalty to the law. She needed something more, something that would ensure action, something that would force the hand of those who controlled John's fate. She thought carefully, weighing the risks and rewards, and realized that the deal she was about to propose could be the most dangerous thing she had ever done in her life. Her mind went over the plan again and again. She would meet with a man known for his power in the town, a man whose word could sway the sheriff and delay the execution. But approaching him was risky. He was cautious, suspicious, and known to hold grudges. Any wrong move could turn him against her. She had to be careful, clever, and convincing. She prepared herself, rehearsing every word in her mind, thinking about how she would speak, how she would present her case, and how she would show that saving John was not only right, but urgent. Mary walked through the quiet streets, moving quickly but quietly, her heart racing with each step. The town was slowly waking, but most people remained inside, unsure of what the day would bring. She reached the house of the man she planned to meet, her hand shaking slightly as she knocked on the heavy wooden door. The sound echoed in the quiet morning, and Mary held her breath. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a tall man with a stern face. His eyes, sharp and calculating, studied her carefully, as if weighing every word before it left her lips. "Mary," he said, his voice low and measured, "you're up early. What brings you here at this hour?" Mary took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew that this moment was critical, that the next words could change everything. "I'm here about John," she said, her voice firm despite the fear inside her. "They plan to hang him at dawn. I know you have influence, and I beg you to help me. I will do whatever it takes to save him. Please, listen to me. I have a plan, but it will require courage and trust." The man's expression did not change. He remained silent, letting her words hang in the air. Mary felt the tension rising, but she pressed on. She explained everything she could: John's character, his innocence, the loyalty and respect he had earned from neighbors, and the injustice of the situation. She spoke of their children, their home, and the life they had built together. She painted a vivid picture of a man who deserved a chance to live, a man whose death would leave a void not just in her heart but in the town itself. The man listened, his face unreadable. He asked questions, probing, testing her sincerity. Mary answered every question with honesty, showing the depth of her courage and determination. She could feel the risk of every word, but she also knew that honesty was her only weapon. She could not bluff or pretend. She had to be real, because John's life was on the line. As she spoke, she could see the man's eyes soften slightly, and for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. "I will consider it," he said finally, his voice still cautious but less cold than before. "But understand this: the law is strict, and the sheriff is determined. If we are caught trying to interfere, the consequences will be severe. You must be prepared for danger, for threats, even for sacrifice. Are you willing to take that risk?" Mary nodded without hesitation. "Yes," she said, "I will do whatever is necessary. I cannot allow him to die. Not today. Not like this. I will face anything, endure anything, to save him." The man studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well," he said. "We will act, but you must follow my instructions exactly. There is no room for error. One misstep, and all will be lost." Mary listened carefully as he explained the plan. She would have to negotiate with the sheriff and others in authority using a combination of persuasion, secrecy, and subtle leverage. She would have to move quickly, calmly, and intelligently. Every step mattered. There would be no second chances. She realized the full danger of what she had undertaken, but she also knew that hesitation was not an option. She had committed herself, and there was no turning back. As Mary left the house, her mind raced with strategies and contingencies. She thought about how she would approach the sheriff, what arguments she would use, and how she would navigate the delicate web of town politics and power. She considered every possible outcome, every risk, every obstacle. She knew that some people might resist, that others might betray her, and that the smallest mistake could undo everything. But she also knew that courage, determination, and love could overcome fear and danger. She pressed on, moving through the streets with quiet resolve. John, meanwhile, waited in his cell, unaware of the efforts his wife was making on his behalf. He paced the small room, listening to the faint sounds of the town waking, feeling the chill of the stone walls against his back. Fear gnawed at him, but he clung to hope. He thought of Mary, of her strength, of the love that had always guided her. That thought gave him courage, even in the darkest moments. He prayed silently, wishing for her safety, knowing that she was risking everything to save him. Mary reached the sheriff's office, her mind sharp, her words ready. She knocked on the heavy door, and when it opened, she was met with the stern gaze of the man who had the power to end John's life. She spoke quickly, clearly, and with conviction, presenting the arguments she had carefully prepared. She emphasized John's innocence, his value to the community, and the irreversible consequences of his execution. She showed courage, intelligence, and determination, and she did not allow herself to be intimidated by the sheriff's authority. The sheriff listened, initially unmoved, but Mary's persistence and clarity began to have an effect. She explained the delicate nature of the town's politics, the importance of careful intervention, and the potential consequences if action was not taken. She proposed a solution, a way to delay the execution while ensuring that justice and order were respected. It was a dangerous proposal, but it was also carefully reasoned, showing foresight and responsibility. For a long moment the sheriff remained silent. Mary's heart pounded as she waited, aware that every second counted. Finally, he spoke. "I do not usually bend the law for anyone," he said. "But your courage, your determination, and the circumstances, I will delay the execution. But this must remain secret, understood? One wrong word, and everything is lost." "Do you accept these terms?" Mary nodded, relief flooding her. But she knew the danger was not over. This was only the first step. She would have to act quickly, coordinate carefully, and continue to navigate the dangerous path she had chosen. She had made the deal, the most dangerous deal of her life, but she had done it to save John. Every decision, every action from now on would matter, and she could not afford to fail. As she left the sheriff's office, she felt a mixture of fear, relief, and determination. She had risked her life, her reputation, and her safety to make this deal, and it had worked, at least for now. But she knew the danger was far from over. The day was only beginning, and there were still obstacles ahead. She had to act carefully, think clearly, and move swiftly. John's life depended on it, and she would not allow fear or hesitation to interfere. Mary returned home briefly, gathering herself, preparing for the next steps. She thought of John, of the small cell where he waited, and she whispered a silent promise to him. She would not let him down. She would face every danger, endure every risk, and do whatever was necessary to save him. She knew that love, courage, and determination could overcome even the greatest obstacles, and she held on to that belief tightly. The town continued to stir, unaware of the secret negotiations taking place behind closed doors. The streets were filling slowly with people, the sounds of daily life beginning to return. But Mary moved through it all with purpose, focused, determined, and fearless. She knew that every moment mattered, every decision could tip the balance, and every action could save or end a life. Mary's courage, intelligence, and determination had carried her this far. She had made the dangerous deal, and for the first time she felt that hope was possible. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she also knew that she would face them with the same unwavering determination that had brought her to this moment. John's life was in her hands, and she would not let him go. The town had grown quiet again as the early morning light began to stretch across the streets. The colors of dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, but Mary felt no comfort in the beauty of the morning. Her heart was heavy with worry, and her mind raced with thoughts of John. She knew that the next hours would be critical. The dangerous deal she had made had bought some time, but time alone would not save him. Every moment brought new tension, new challenges, and new fears that threatened to overwhelm her. Mary returned to their small home and peeked through the window at the town. People were beginning to stir, opening doors, stepping out to begin their day, yet the streets felt almost empty. It was as if the town itself held its breath, waiting for something to happen. She could hear faint sounds of footsteps on the cobblestones and the occasional creak of a door, but otherwise there was silence. The silence seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute, pressing down on Mary like a weight she could not shake. She thought of John, imprisoned just a few blocks away, waiting for the dawn that could either be his end or the moment of his salvation. She imagined him pacing the small cell, his hands gripping the cold iron bars, his mind restless and anxious. She wished she could be with him, to hold his hand, to whisper words of hope and reassurance. But she could not. She had to act from the outside, relying on the delicate plan she had set in motion and the promises of those she had persuaded. Mary busied herself with preparations, her hands trembling slightly as she moved about their home. She arranged small things to keep her mind occupied, folding linens, tidying the room, making sure the children had breakfast ready for when they woke. Every movement was deliberate, every action a way to stay focused, to channel her anxiety into something productive. Yet even in these small tasks, her mind kept drifting back to John, and the thought of his life hanging by a thread made her chest ache. She reviewed the details of the dangerous deal she had made. The man she had convinced to intervene with the sheriff had promised action, but it was not guaranteed. There were so many variables. The sheriff could change his mind. Someone could overhear their plans. A small mistake could unravel everything. Mary knew that the hours before dawn were the most dangerous, filled with uncertainty and fear. She understood that she could not control everything, but she could control herself, her courage, and her determination. The first signs of the town waking fully made her move even more carefully. Merchants began to open their shops, the clatter of tools and the voices of early workers filling the streets. Mary moved from window to window, watching for any sign of danger, any hint that her plan might be discovered. She felt the tension building inside her, a tight knot of fear and anticipation that would not loosen until she knew John was safe. Every passing minute was precious, every sound could carry information, every shadow could hide a threat. She thought back to the night before, to the moment she had spent negotiating, pleading, and strategizing. Every decision she had made had been risky, but necessary. The danger of that night now seemed to extend into the morning, each step she took now carrying consequences that could not be undone. Mary felt the weight of responsibility pressing on her, heavier than she had ever felt before. She was not just fighting for John's life, she was fighting against the fear, the doubt, and the rigid rules of the town. Mary's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She froze for a moment, her heart leaping into her throat. Could this be the person who would carry out the deal? Or was it someone else? Someone who might discover her plans and ruin everything. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and opened the door just enough to see a familiar figure standing there. It was the man who had agreed to intervene, his expression serious but calm. "They are preparing," he said quietly. "The sheriff will make his move soon. We have a short window. You must be ready." Mary nodded, understanding immediately. There was no time to waste. Every second now was critical. She followed him quickly, moving through the quiet streets toward the location where the plan would unfold. Her mind raced, thinking through each step, each possibility, and each danger. She felt a mixture of fear, anticipation, and determination that made her pulse race and her hands sweat. They reached a small alley near the jail, a place where the man had arranged for discreet communication. Mary listened carefully as he explained the final steps of the plan. She would need to speak with the sheriff directly, using the arguments she had prepared. She would need to remain calm, clear, and convincing, showing courage and determination without revealing fear. Any hint of hesitation could be fatal. She understood that fully. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, knowing that John's life depended entirely on her actions. Mary moved forward, each step deliberate and controlled, her heart pounding in her chest. She approached the sheriff's office, the building looming large and intimidating in the soft light of dawn. She paused for a moment, gathering her courage, reminding herself why she was doing this. She was doing this for John, for their family, and for the hope that love and courage could overcome fear and danger. Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the door. The sheriff's voice called out, stern and questioning. "Who is it?" "It's Mary," she replied firmly. "I need to speak with you. It's urgent. It concerns John." The door opened slowly, and Mary stepped inside, her eyes meeting the sheriff's gaze. He studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. Mary felt the tension rising, every second stretching into an eternity. She took a deep breath and began to speak, presenting her arguments with clarity, honesty, and courage. She reminded him of John's character, the importance of justice, and the irreversible consequences of his execution. She spoke of the town, the children, and the life that could be lost forever if he were hanged. The sheriff listened, initially unmoved, but Mary's persistence and careful reasoning began to have an effect. She presented the plan she had coordinated with the influential man, showing how it could save John while maintaining order and respecting the law. She remained calm, focused, and persuasive, demonstrating courage that impressed even the hardened sheriff. Every word mattered, every gesture counted, and Mary knew that failure was not an option. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an hour. Mary could feel the tension in the room, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She imagined John in his cell, waiting, hoping, and fearing, unaware of the battle being fought on his behalf. She whispered a silent prayer, asking for guidance and strength, and continued to speak with determination and clarity. Finally, the sheriff nodded slowly. "Very well," he said. "We will delay the execution. But this must remain secret. One wrong word, one careless action, and everything is lost. Do you understand?" Mary nodded, relief flooding her, but she knew the danger was far from over. The plan had worked, but it was fragile. Every step now would be critical, and she would need to remain vigilant until John was safe. She thanked the sheriff and stepped outside, feeling the first real sense of hope she had experienced in hours. But the day was not yet won. Mary knew that others in the town might still resist, that rumors could spread, and that any misstep could undo all her efforts. She returned home briefly, gathering herself, preparing for the next steps. She thought of John, of the small cell where he waited, and whispered a promise. She would not let him down. She would face every danger, endure every risk, and do whatever was necessary to ensure his survival. Mary spent the remaining hours before dawn moving carefully through the town, checking on the progress of the plan, ensuring that everyone involved was ready. She spoke quietly to the man who had helped, confirming that the sheriff would act as agreed. She reminded herself of the stakes, of the danger, and of the courage required. She understood that time was precious, that every minute mattered, and that John's life depended entirely on her. As the sky lightened and the first signs of dawn appeared, Mary felt a mixture of fear, anticipation, and determination. The dangerous deal had bought them time, but it had also placed them in a precarious position. Every step now was critical, every action had consequences, and every decision could tip the balance between life and death. She steeled herself for the final moments before John's fate would be decided, knowing that her courage, determination, and careful planning had brought them this far. Mary waited, watching the town, listening for any sign of movement, any indication that the plan was unfolding as expected. The tension was almost unbearable, but she remained focused, calm, and determined. She thought of John, of the love that had driven her to take such risks, and she drew strength from that love. She would not allow fear to paralyze her. She would not allow doubt to take hold. She would see this through, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The minutes stretched, each one heavy with anticipation. Mary moved quietly, checking the arrangements, communicating in whispers with those involved. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, but she also felt the strength that came from purpose, courage, and love. John's life depended on her, and she would not falter. She had faced fear, risked everything, and navigated danger to bring them to this point. Now, she would see the plan through to its conclusion. The first light of dawn was spreading slowly across the town, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch forever. Mary stood quietly by the window, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes fixed on the distant jail where John was waiting. The night of fear, tension, and careful planning had brought her to this moment. She had made the most dangerous deal of her life, and now it all came down to whether it would succeed. Every second mattered. Every decision she had made was leading to this instant, and she could not allow doubt or fear to interfere. Mary thought of John in his cell, pacing the cold, narrow space, imagining the bars pressing down on him. He did not know yet that the plan was working, that she had negotiated and persuaded powerful people on his behalf. All he knew was fear, the fear of the inevitable, the fear of dawn, and the rope that awaited him. Mary closed her eyes for a moment, sending silent words of reassurance and love across the distance. She promised herself that she would see him free again, that she would not let the danger, the uncertainty, or the law's cruelty take him from her. The streets of the town were slowly filling with the sounds of morning life, but Mary felt like she existed in a separate world, a world where time had slowed, where every sound carried meaning, and every shadow was a reminder of the stakes. She moved quietly through the house, checking small details, making sure the children were safe, making sure that the arrangements she had set in motion were still in place. She knew that the plan required careful timing, precise action, and absolute focus. One mistake now could undo everything. Meanwhile, at the jail, John was unaware of the invisible web of protection and negotiation that Mary had spun. He felt fear gnawing at him, each moment heavier than the last. The sound of the jail door opening and closing, the faint shuffle of boots on stone floors, and the occasional whisper of the guards kept him on edge. His mind raced with possibilities. What if Mary had failed? What if no one intervened? What if the deal had not been enough? He gritted his teeth and tried to steady himself, holding on to the hope that Mary's courage would see him through. Back in the house, Mary received a quiet signal from the man she had persuaded to help. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A nod, a whispered confirmation that the sheriff was moving according to the plan. Mary's heart lifted slightly, but she knew that the danger was not over. The sheriff could change his mind, someone could notice them, or an unforeseen event could disrupt the delicate balance of their carefully laid plans. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and prepared for the final steps. Mary left the house and moved quickly but quietly through the streets, her mind sharp and focused. She approached the jail, careful not to draw attention, aware that every step could carry consequences. The morning air was cool, carrying faint sounds of the town coming alive, but she felt no comfort in it. Her focus was entirely on John, on the plan, and on the dangerous moments that lay ahead. She reminded herself that courage, determination, and careful planning had brought them this far, and she could not falter now. The sheriff, as arranged, had delayed the execution, but there were still procedures to follow. Mary approached the office where the decision-making would be finalized, and waited, her heart racing. She could see the tension in the faces of those involved, the uncertainty in the eyes of the men who had once intended to hang John at dawn. Mary stepped forward calmly, speaking with confidence and clarity. She reminded them of the moral responsibility they bore, the value of John's life, and the irreversible consequences of carrying out the execution. Her words were persuasive, but more importantly, they were filled with courage and determination. Mary did not allow fear to show. She did not hesitate. She presented the facts, explained the plan, and demonstrated that saving John was not only just, but necessary. Her calm strength began to sway the hesitant, and one by one, those who had held the power to act on John's fate began to nod, agreeing to delay the execution and allow him a chance at life. The tension in the room eased slightly, but Mary knew that vigilance was still required. Meanwhile, John remained in his cell, restless and fearful. He sensed a change in the air, subtle shifts in the sounds around him, movements that seemed different from the night before. He could not yet see the plan coming to fruition, but he clung to hope, imagining Mary fighting on his behalf, risking everything for him. Each sound, each step outside his cell carried meaning. And then, finally, he saw it, a guard approaching, not with the rope or a grim expression, but with a small, secretive nod, a sign that everything Mary had orchestrated was working. The tension was almost unbearable as John realized that the execution would not happen, at least not immediately. Relief began to wash over him, but it was mixed with lingering fear. He still had to survive the next few hours, still had to trust that Mary's courage had been enough. He leaned against the cold stone wall, taking deep breaths, trying to steady his racing heart. He whispered a silent prayer, thanking Mary for her bravery, her intelligence, and her unwavering determination to save him. Outside, Mary continued to monitor the situation, coordinating quietly with the man who had helped, ensuring that every step of the plan was executed perfectly. The dangerous deal she had made was holding, but it required constant attention and vigilance. Mary felt the strain, the exhaustion, and the fear pressing down on her, yet she pressed on, fueled by love and the knowledge that John's life depended entirely on her actions. Every movement, every decision, every word mattered. As the sun rose higher, The town slowly began to notice that something unusual was happening. There was no execution, no gathering crowd, no spectacle to mark the morning. Some people whispered in surprise, others in suspicion, but no one could yet fully understand the events unfolding behind the closed doors. Mary remained focused, ensuring that no one discovered the delicate negotiations and careful interventions that had prevented John's death. She knew that secrecy was essential. One leak could undo everything she had worked for. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, John was released from his cell. The guards, acting under the instructions Mary had helped secure, opened the door quietly and signaled him to move quickly and silently. John stepped out cautiously, his heart racing, and saw Mary waiting nearby. Her eyes filled with relief, hope, and love. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of fear, tension, and the uncertainty of the past hours hung in the air, and then they embraced, holding on to each other as if their lives depended on that very moment. And, in truth, they did. Mary whispered words of reassurance, telling John that it was over, that he was safe, that the dangerous deal had worked. John, still shaking from the fear and relief, held her tightly, feeling the warmth of her love and courage flow into him. They moved together quietly through the town, careful not to draw attention, knowing that their safety depended on discretion even after the immediate danger had passed. Every step was careful, deliberate, and full of gratitude for the narrow escape from death. The children, still asleep in their beds, were gently awakened and reunited with their father. The house, once filled with fear and tension, now hummed with quiet relief. Mary and John sat together, holding hands, reflecting on the ordeal they had endured. The events of the past night and morning had tested them in ways they could never have imagined. The danger, the negotiations, the fear, and the courage had all been worth it for this moment of reunion and relief. Mary thought back to the choices she had made, the risk, the sacrifice, the dangerous deal that had saved John's life. She knew that her courage had been tested like never before, that she had faced fear head-on and refused to be paralyzed by it. John's life had depended entirely on her actions, and she had not failed. The experience left them both forever changed, aware of the fragility of life and the strength of love, courage, and determination. As the day progressed, the town slowly returned to normal, unaware of the extraordinary events that had unfolded. Mary and John remained cautious, understanding that their safety depended on discretion. They spoke quietly, planning for the future, grateful for the chance to continue their life together. The ordeal had tested them, but it had also strengthened their bond, showing them the power of love, determination, and the courage to face danger when the stakes are highest. Mary and John knew that they would never forget this day, the danger they had faced, and the courage they had shown. The dangerous deal, the tense waiting, the negotiations, and the fear had all led to this moment of triumph and relief. They had faced the possibility of death and survived, and the lessons they had learned would stay with them forever. The family settled into their home, the fear slowly melting into quiet gratitude. The town moved on, but Mary and John carried with them the memory of courage, love, and the incredible lengths one person would go to save the life of someone they loved. The dangerous deal, the midnight negotiations, the tense waiting hours, and the final success would become a story they would remember and tell, a story of hope, bravery, and the triumph of the human spirit over fear and danger.